She is not his daughter. Desmond Fahey said it kindly. That was the part Gus Petrak could never get past. The man had not sneered. No adoption, no decree, no court order. In 20 years, no court in this country has put those two names on one piece of paper. Gus folded his hands on his knee. There was flour under his nails. Mr. Petrak, you fed her. You paid for her school. Gus said nothing. You sat up with her when she had the flu. You gave her the name of the street she was found on. I am not going to pretend any of that is a small thing. Fahey turned a page. It is a very large thing. It is simply not the thing the law asks about. Is Delia Marsh your daughter? Gus opened his mouth. Yes or no, sir? No. Somebody in the gallery made a small sound. By noon, that one word was on every wire in the state. 11 days later, the same room was standing room only. The same lawyer was on his feet shouting for a recess. And the woman who was not his daughter came up the center aisle. She set a cardboard box on the table in front of the judge. It had tape on 3 corners. It was the only thing in that room nobody had paid for. Before we go on, if this is your first time here, hit subscribe and turn the notifications on. By the end of this one, you are going to want the next one. Now, let's go back to the night this started. What happened in Ashfield that winter did not just decide who owned a bakery. It decided what the county was willing to write down. Ashfield sat in a valley in western Pennsylvania. It used to make steel. By that winter, it made bread. 3 plants, 1,100 people on the payroll, and a night bakery on Dell Street that had been the whole company once. Gus Petrak bought the bakery on Dell Street when he was 34. It was going under. 1 belt oven and 2 mixers. He lit the oven at 1, and the trucks came at 5. In between, it was him and a radio. That was the part he liked. He had been at it 9 years the night he found her. It was March. The ash was still freezing in the can. He carried the can out the back door at 3. There was something on the vent grate. The grate sat low in the brick where the oven breathed out. It was the only warm thing outdoors on that street. Gus had seen cats on it. This was not a cat. He set the can down. He did not go closer. He counted 3 steps back and stopped. If he walked up on her, she would run, and she would run toward the cold. So he talked to the wall. I work here. That heat is coming off my oven. Nothing moved. I'm going inside to use the phone. The door stays open. That's the whole thing that's happening. The nightline asked questions he could not answer. How old is she? I don't know. He looked back down the alley. Is she hurt? I haven't been close enough to look. Sir, do not move the child. I wasn't going to. He brought a stool out and sat in his doorway with the light behind him. That was on purpose. He knew how a story like that gets told. So he did it in the light and in order. He wrote the time of the call on a receipt. He kept the receipt. 20 years later, a lawyer would try to make that night ugly. There would be a receipt. Around 4, he took a roll off the belt. This is too hot for about a minute. You don't have to eat it. It's just for holding. He set it on the edge of the grate and stepped back. She did not eat it. She picked it up in both hands and held it against her chest. Gus had fed this town for 9 years. He knew he had not handed her food. He had handed her something warm. She was not going to spend it. The county car came at 5:10. The woman had a clipboard and a low voice. You didn't take her inside. No, ma'am. Why not? Because she's a child and I'm a grown man. Because it's 3 in the morning and there's nobody out here but the 2 of us. Because I wanted somebody who isn't me to be able to say what happened. She wrote for a while. You called us at 3. I found her at 3. I called you at 3. The woman looked at him a moment. Then she wrote that down. First name? Delia. It was the first word out of her. Delia what, honey? The child looked at her. Your last name. Your family name. Nothing. The woman waited longer than she had to. Then she wrote something in the blank. The woman on the clipboard wrote down the street. The child had been found in the alley behind the bakery, off Marsh Street. The form wanted a family name, and there wasn't one. So Marsh went in the blank. It was meant to hold the place until something better came along. For 20 years, the girl was called by an address. Nothing better came along. Gus asked about it the first spring. When does the adoption part start? It doesn't. Not yet. What does that mean, not yet? The caseworker was not unkind about it. Nobody in this ever was. It means her mother never signed anything. A court can't hand a child to you, while somebody else still has the right to her. Her mother has that right, and she has never given it up. Then find her. We've looked. There's no address, no arrest, no death certificate. There's nothing to serve. Gus was quiet. So what happens? So she stays where she is. Fostered. Reviewed every 6 months. And after that, she put the pen down. There's a thing called guardianship. It is not the same as being her father. What's the difference? The difference is that it ends. Gus thought about that. Then I'll do the part that doesn't end. Foster placement ran 4 years. Guardianship ran 4 more. At 18, the file closed on its own, the way a file does. Nobody in the county did one wrong thing the whole time. That was the part that would be hard to explain later. There was no villain in it. There was a woman who never came back. There was a law that would not move without her. And there were a good many people doing their jobs correctly. She came to the house with a plastic grocery bag. There were clothes in it. There was also every piece of paper that had her name on it. The intake form, the placement letter, a hospital bracelet, cut, a school lunch card with a punched corner. She counted them at night. Gus heard it through the wall for a week before he understood. He did not ask about the bag or the counting. He did not ask why she did her homework on the backs of things. Paper with her name on it did not get used up. Some months later, he came in from the truck with something and set it on her bed. It was a file box, gray with a lid. He did not say anything about it. He went back out to finish the run. She did not say thank you. She moved everything into it. The bag went in the trash the same night. 3 days later, she said the only thing she ever said about it. It has a lid. Gus said that most of them did. I know. This one has a lid. She was 17 the first time her name went on something that mattered. It happened at the plant office, at a card table by the window. Everybody called it the kitchen table. She was doing calculus on it. The lawyer had brought an amendment to the trust. It needed 2 witnesses. Bunny Kasich had gone to the bank and was not coming back before 4. So there were 3 grown men in that room, and one 17-year-old with a pencil. Gus took the pen out of his shirt pocket and held it out to her. Read it first. It's 11 pages. I know how long it is. She read it. All of it, front to back. The lawyer looked at his watch. Gus watched him do it and said nothing. 19 minutes. 3 men waited while a girl finished reading. The second witness was Woody Pratt. He had run the night belt since before she was born. He signed his name like he was building something. When it was over, she asked for a copy of her own. Not because she understood every line of it, because her name was on it. She folded the copy in half, and in half again, and put it in her school bag. The company had started as 3 vans. By then, it was 3 plants. The year before, Gus had signed the whole thing, over to the people who worked in it. He was 50. Warren Tice carried the papers out to the plant that day. He asked him 3 times whether he knew what he was doing. Say it back to me. Say out loud what this does. It puts the company in the trust. It puts the company in the hands of 1,100 people. You will not own this place. They will. Tice put the folder down on the hood of his car. Every year a man works here, a piece of it goes into his name. When he quits, when he retires, the company buys that piece back from him in cash. So think about what that makes this. Tell me what it makes it. It makes it their retirement, not their wages. Their retirement. If this company ever goes under, it does not cost them a paycheck. It costs them the end of their lives. Gus signed it anyway. Tice witnessed it anyway, because that was the job. Then he drove home and did not sleep. He kept every word of that conversation for 13 years. Later, there was an offer to pay for law school. No, it's sitting there. That's what it's sitting there for. If you pay for it, then everything I ever do for you afterward is just you doing it for yourself. He did not bring it up again. Curtis had been 16 the year the county car came. Old enough to have opinions, young enough to keep them, where nobody could see them. He was 24 now and starting to run things, and good at it. He said her name the way a man says a word he learned late. There was always a half beat in front of it. The offer came in on a Thursday. By the next Thursday, the board had stopped agreeing with itself. Stanmore Capital wanted to buy the company. How much? Somebody read the number out loud. Then, nobody said anything for a while. That is 4 times what this place is worth. It's 4 times what the bread is worth. That was Warren Tice talking. At the time, everybody took it for a joke. Then what are they buying? Nobody at that table had an answer. Nobody went looking for one either. Tice did not want to listen to Stanmore. He wanted the trust opened up first. Before anybody votes on anything, I want to see where the money has been going. You know where it's been going, Warren. I know where I have been told it's been going. What he filed was a complaint in federal court. It said the founder had used the trust as his own private account. 1,100 people owned that trust. It said the trustee had let him do it. There was no forgery in it. There was not one invented fact. That was the frightening part. Everything in that complaint had happened. Desmond Fahey had simply set the true things next to each other in an order nobody had ever set them in. Tuition, a used car, a bar exam fee, a wire transfer in a bad winter. 20 years of a man doing what a man does, laid out in a column with dates on it, under a heading that made it read like theft. And at the end of it, no exhibit at all, a blank. Fahey did not close with a document. He closed with the absence of one. In 20 years, no court in this country has put those 2 names on one piece of paper. Then the hearing room. Then the question. Is Delia Marsh your daughter? No. Nobody in that courtroom knew what the trust actually said about Delia Marsh. Everything after this turned on it. The thing Fahey called a private account had a name on the paperwork. It was an employee ownership trust. It held the company for 1,100 people, and it had been audited every year of its life. Delia Marsh was not a beneficiary of it. She was its trustee, independent trustee, appointed when the bank that used to hold the job resigned the business. She had been 26. Hollis Greer had written supply contracts for the company for 9 years. He had never stood up in a federal courtroom in his life. He asked her to explain it to him slowly. Say it in words my mother would use. There's a bucket. 1,100 people own what's in it. I'm the one who holds it for them. He wrote the word bucket on his pad. And you hold it for Gus. No. That's the part everybody gets wrong. She put 2 fingers on the table, a little apart. A trustee's duty runs to the beneficiaries, not to the man who appointed her. Meaning what, exactly? meaning if his interests and their interests ever pull apart, I am required to go with them, not with him. That isn't loyalty or disloyalty. That is the law. Hollis looked at the two fingers for a while. So when they say you belong to him, when they say that, they are describing a crime. One I would go to prison for. He put his pen down. And you can't say a word of this to Gus. No. Gus called her 4 times in the first 2 days. She did not pick up. She could not. From the hour that complaint was filed, every call between the two of them was evidence. And it was the exact evidence Fahey was hoping for. A trustee and the man accused of using her, talking it over, getting the story straight. Her silence was not a strategy. It was the only thing standing between him and the thing they said he was. Gus did not know that. He would not know it for 4 days. Warren Tice came to see Curtis at the plant in the afternoon. The floor was loud enough that 2 men could talk. 11 years you've lived in this building. About that. And the vote sits with somebody your father picked up off a grate. Curtis did not answer that. I'm not asking you to hate her. Good. I'm asking whether you think it's right. That's all. That's the whole question. Curtis wiped his hands on a rag he did not need. He gave her a pen when she was 17. I know he did. He's never handed me anything to read in my life. Tice did not answer right away. He had not expected it to be this easy. Then you already know what you think. What Curtis signed 4 days later was 3 sentences long. Every one of them was true. My father always spoke about that trust as though it were hers. He had. Gus had said it 100 times, at tables and in trucks. It was the way a man says a thing when he is proud of somebody. Curtis wrote it down without the table, without the truck, without the pride. What was left could be read aloud in a courtroom and sound like a confession. Gus read the affidavit in Hollis Greer's office. He read it twice. Do you want to respond to it? No. Gus, he's your son. You're allowed to be angry about this. He isn't lying. He handed the page back and asked about something else, and that was the end of it. He never said one word to Curtis about it. Not that week. Not that month. That was worse than shouting, and both of them knew it. Warren Tice was not a bought man. That was the thing nobody in Ashfield could ever make fit. He had carried that company's paper for 20 years. He had watched a sentimental old baker put 1,100 retirements into one document, then hand the key to a girl he had no legal claim to. In his own head, there was no villain in this either. There was a fire, and one man willing to be unpopular about it. His wife asked him once, late, whether he was sure. I'm not sure. Then why? Because I'm the only one doing anything. Gus called Delia again on the Thursday. It rang out. He did not leave a message. The interview ran on a Tuesday morning. It was frightening because it was good. I have 1,100 households to protect. The reporter waited him out. And I have one old man who thinks affection is a business plan. Nobody could argue with the first sentence. That was the trouble with it. It made the second one sound reasonable. A regional grocer put its orders on hold. The bank pulled the seasonal line. The school district moved its contract out to rebid. And the woman who signed that letter apologized in it twice. The floor split the way a town splits. He fed my mother for 9 years. I know he did. I've got a girl starting college. The second man did not look up from the pallet. So did he. That isn't the same, and you know it. Both of those men were right. They had to work the same shift anyway. Gus was in the mixing room at 4 in the morning, the way he had been for 29 years. Bunny found him there and stood in the doorway a while. You could say something. People would listen. To what? To anything. Warren's saying plenty. She waited. Warren's saying true things in the wrong order. I can't fix that by talking more. He scaled flour and watched the belt and sent the trucks out at 5. The town watched him do it. Nobody could decide whether it was strength or whether he simply had not understood yet what was happening to him. The broker called on a Wednesday. That is how those things come. I represent an interested party. I would rather not name them. Then don't. He did not seem to mind that at all. The motion challenging your position comes off the calendar on Friday. All you have to do is step down as trustee. And? There is no and. That's the entire offer. Then he said the part he had been sent to say. Nobody wants your childhood in a transcript. There is no version of a trial where that stays out of it. You can end this on Friday, and nobody ever has to hear where you were found. Was that supposed to be kind? I think it was, actually. He sent it in writing afterward. 3 paragraphs, very polite. She did not record him. She did not think to. She had been keeping paper since she was 9 years old, and the habit had never once asked her whether she was being clever about it. She saved the message the way she saved everything. Date, sender, folder. And then she sat with it. That is the part nobody puts in the version they tell afterward. She sat with it from about 9 at night until the sky went gray outside. Resigning was not surrender. That was the trouble with it. Resigning worked. If she stepped down, the conflict claim collapsed. The complaint lost its shape. Gus Petrak kept his name and his plants and his floor, and the whole thing was over by Friday. All of it could be bought with one signature. The price was that she would be, on paper, and for good, the thing they said she was. Nobody would even have to lie. 200 miles east, in a glass room, with the lights still on, Adrian Kolb had never once thought about bread. What's the acreage on the Dell Street site? 9.5. The rail spur is the one that matters. Somebody turned a page. And the trustee, she's a condition. She'll clear. Nobody in that room said a wrong thing about Delia Marsh. Nobody said anything about her at all. She was an item with a date next to it. Now, before we go on, if you are still with me, do me one small thing. Tell me in the comments what time it is where you are. I like knowing who is out there in the dark. All right. Back to a woman sitting up all night with a message she had not answered. It was in the filings the whole time. It was just filed on the property side instead of the food side. Stanmore was not buying bread. There was a man on the night belt named Roy who read things nobody else read. He brought a printout into the break room. Who told you to look at the property filings? Nobody. They're public. Somebody just has to read them. Say that part again, slower. They buy the ground the plants sit on. Then they sell that ground to somebody else. Then we rent it back off them. Somebody laughed once and then stopped. Rent our own floor. Rent our own floor. Nobody laughed the second time. That can't be legal. It's completely legal. People do it every day. It's the rent afterward that's the trick. Roy turned the page around. And when the rent goes up, then the plant can't carry it. And then it closes. Roy put his finger on the last column. And then it closes. And the ground still belongs to whoever bought it. That was the point of it from the front end. How many acres is that? All 3 sites. 91. Somebody said that was a lot of ground for a bakery. It isn't for the bakery. Nobody wants the bakery. Which meant the 1,100 jobs Warren Tice believed he was rescuing were the merchandise. He never knew that. Tice was not bought. He was made correct. Somebody had spent a long, patient year putting reasons in front of a decent man. By the end, he stood exactly where they needed him. He believed every step had been his own idea. The company's own copy should have ended all of this in an afternoon. The company did not have one. 6 years before, a main line let go over the file room on a Sunday. By Monday, there were 4 inches of water, and a restoration crew in the building. Restoration crews are paid to make a room usable. They pulled the wet cartons out to the lot and ran them through a shredder truck. They got a signature for it. The signature was correct. There was no conspiracy anywhere in it. That was the worst of it. Nothing to expose. A pipe broke, a company did its job, and 11 pages went into a truck. So the last copy of that amendment left in the world was a folded one, folded in half and in half again, and carried home in a school bag. Because her name was on it. Nobody knew that. Delia Marsh did not know it either. She thought she remembered folding it. She was not sure. She had 20 years of paper in a storage unit. She had no idea which box. Fahey stood up before anything else happened. One preliminary matter. Counsel is a witness in this case. She cannot be both. Havas Greer argued it. He argued it well. It did not matter, because the rule is old, and the rule is short. Judge Alice Ferrand granted it in part. Miss Marsh may remain at the table. Miss Marsh will not address the court. Delia sat down. So the record is clear about why. If the person arguing the case is also the person testifying, nobody listening can tell which is argument and which is evidence. That's the whole of it. It took 90 seconds. That was all it took. She kept her hands flat on the table. She did not look at the gallery. There was nothing else she was permitted to do. Curtis Petrak's affidavit was read into the record at 11. 3 sentences. A clerk read them in a clear voice, and they sounded exactly the way Fahey had known they would sound. Gus was in the second row. He looked at the back of his son's head, and then at the table, where Delia was not speaking, and he did not understand one thing about what was happening to him. Before the recess, the judge said a sentence that emptied the room out. I want briefing by Monday on suspension of the trustee. If the trustee was suspended, the seat went to a temporary appointee. A temporary appointee would put the sale to a vote. The vote was already counted. That evening, somebody knocked on Gus's door. It was Bunny Kasich, who had run that office for 30 years, standing on the step with her coat still on. I've got 2 boxes in my basement. Boxes of what? I don't know. That's the honest answer. When the water came in, I carried out what I could reach before the crew got there. I never opened them. She stood there a second longer. I should have taken them upstairs. I've thought about that every day for 6 years. Gus put the kettle on. It was the first time in 5 days that anybody had come to the house. At midnight, 40 miles away, a woman pulled her car up to a row of orange doors and rolled the shutter up on Unit 112. She did not say anything. There was nobody there to say it to. 22 boxes. 1 fluorescent tube with a bad ballast in it. A folding chair she had bought for $11 and sat in maybe 4 times in 9 years. She started at the wrong end, the way everybody does. School first. Then the 2 years at the bank. Then a box that turned out to be nothing but tax returns. Her hands went gray and her knees hurt, and after a while, she stopped reading labels and just took lids off. She found it at 2:10 in the morning. 11 pages, folded in half and folded again, in a manila envelope, with the flap tucked in instead of sealed. The creases had gone soft and white, the way creases go when paper has been folded a long time. She sat down on the concrete with it. Then she called Havas Greer, who picked up on the second ring, because he had not been sleeping either. I have it. You have what? The amendment. My copy. The one I took home. There was a pause on his end that she did not like. Delia, whose signatures are on it. Mine. Woody Pratt's. And Gus's. So the only surviving copy was witnessed by a 17-year-old. A 17-year-old who is living in the house of the man they're accusing, and it has been sitting in your personal storage for 12 years. Yes. He said the next part carefully. That isn't a document. That's Fahey's closing argument. He was right, and they both knew it before he had finished saying it. The second witness was Woody Pratt, and Woody Pratt was in a care home outside Erie and had not known his own son's name since March. Can we still use it? We can put it in front of her. Whether she believes it is a different question. What would make her believe it? She could hear him thinking. Something from outside this family. Something nobody in it could have made. She sat there with the pages on her knees. Then, because she had read every page of it once before, and her eye went where her eye always went, she turned the last sheet over. On the back of it, in pencil, was a set of calculus problems. There was a date in the corner in a teacher's hand. There were red marks down the margin. And at the bottom were two initials, where a teacher had signed off a homework page in a public high school, in a district that keeps its grade books for 30 years. She did not move for a while. The thing those men used when they wanted to make her nothing. A kid. He kept around. A girl doing her homework at his table was the thing that made the document real. She called him back. Hollis, it's 4 a.m. Something nobody in this family could have made. By 9, the gallery was full, and people were standing along the back wall. Some had driven in from the next county. Most were in work clothes, coming off a shift or going on to one. The box went on the table at 9:10. Cardboard. Gray. Tape on 3 corners. Delia Marsh sat down beside it and was not permitted to say one word. So she wrote. She wrote on the backs of the sheets because that is what her hand does. She tore each one off and slid it under the table to Hollis Greer. And Hollis, who had never argued in a federal courtroom in his life, stood up a little straighter every time paper touched his fingers. The first note was 6 words long. He read it, and he asked that the school district's records archivist be sworn. The district had kept the gradebook. It had a date on it, and a class period, and a teacher's initials. The initials matched the 2 letters in pencil. At the bottom of the back of page 11, are we certifying a corporate instrument with a math quiz? No, sir. We're certifying the date with a math quiz. The instrument certifies itself. Somebody in the gallery laughed. The judge let it go longer than she had to. Bunny Cassick was sworn after the recess. She had her reading glasses on a chain, and she kept touching them. I carried out what I could reach. The crew got there about 11, and the cartons in the file room. They went in the truck. There's a list. I signed the list. She looked over at Gus when she said the next part, and not at the lawyer who had asked her. I should have taken them upstairs. That was when Fahey stopped arguing about paper. He walked her childhood down one step at a time, in the same weather report voice. The alley. The grate. A mother who never came. A surname taken off a street sign because there was no other name available. He did it well. That was the ugly thing about it. He did it kindly, and every fact he used was true. He had learned all of it out of files. Files that existed because a man once did everything in the light and in order. Then he asked her whether she felt she owed Gus Petrak anything. No. No? She turned in the chair so she was facing him. I have never owed him anything. I am a person who is forbidden by law to owe him anything. That is not the same as being ungrateful. It's a great deal harder. That is a convenient position. Then ask me whether I have ever gone against him. Fahey should not have asked it. Every lawyer in that room knew he should not have asked it. Have you? 4 years ago. He had wanted to put more of his own shares into the trust. He wanted the people who worked for him to have more, and he had the stock to do it. and it was the kindest thing he ever tried to do with money. She stopped him. There's a legal ceiling on what a trust like that can take in a year. He was over it. If you go over it, the whole trust can lose its standing with the government. Not his share. All of it. 1,100 accounts. So you refused a gift. I refused a gift that would have broken the thing it was meant to help. He didn't speak to me properly for a year afterward. He thought I was protecting him from himself. In the second row, an old man in a plain work jacket heard for the first time in 4 years why. He put his hand over his mouth and kept it there. After that, it went quickly, the way these things do once one board comes loose. Hollis put up the Stanmore structure. The ground under all 3 plants, sold and rented back. Then the schedule that went with it, with the closure, windows on it, in plain language. The dates on that schedule were older than the lawsuit. In the back row, a man from the loading dock did the arithmetic out, loud, to nobody at all. Warren Tice did not last 10 minutes on the stand. He did not confess to being paid. He was never paid. He was going to lose the whole thing anyway. At least this way, somebody gets paid something. Adrian Kolb did not look up from the table. Warren, stop talking. And a woman in the back row stood up and said her name for the record. Ruth Cannaday from the Labor Department. We supervise trusts like this one. When somebody offers a trustee a private deal, the trustee is required to tell us. She told us. She told us before she told anybody else. Because if she'd talked it over with Mr. Petrak first, the report would have been worth nothing. 4 days of silence. And that was what it had been for. Judge Ferran ruled before 6. Suspension denied. The sale enjoined. Tice off the board and referred out. The Labor Department opening its own file. Out in the corridor, Gus stood by the window with his hat in both hands. I never wanted you to have to say all that out loud. It was always out loud. It's been out loud since I was 9. The only thing different about today is that somebody wrote it down. Stanmore withdrew inside a month. Kolb's fund drew attention from 2 regulators who had no interest in bread. Tice's file went where those files go. The plants stayed open. The 1,100 kept their accounts. Curtis never apologized. He could not get his mouth around it. What he did instead was put in a written request through the office, like a stranger. You could just ask her for it. I know. Bunny waited with her hand on the keyboard. I want it the way anybody else would get it. Log it in. He read it at his own kitchen table over 3 nights. All of it, front to back. Then he came to Delia with one question about page 9. She answered it. It took about 4 minutes. That was the reconciliation. There was not going to be another one. He never once asked me to read anything. He didn't keep the pen from you. Then what? She thought about how to say it. I was the only one in the room that day. That's the whole of it. It isn't a better story than that. That's a generous way to put it. It's also true. Both of those can be true. They drove out to the care home outside Erie in April. Woody Pratt did not know her. He did not know Gus either. They had stood at the same belt for 19 years. She held the signature page where he could see it. That's good handwriting. It is. He looked a while longer. Whose is it? Yours. He nodded the way a man nods about somebody else's business. Then he went back to the window. Do you want to keep it? No. It has to go back in the box. She thanked him anyway. She thanked him twice. The box did not go into a glass case. It did not go into the trash. The company built a new file room that summer, on the 2nd floor this time. What do I put in the description field? Trust records. Original. It's a cardboard box, Delia. Then put that too. Bunny typed it. Up front or back with the ledgers? Back with the ledgers. It isn't a display. It got a number. It got a shelf. In September, there was a hearing in a small courtroom in the county building. Folding chairs. A radiator that knocks. Adult adoption is a short proceeding. It is mostly paperwork. Both parties are grown. Both consent. And nobody has to stand up and explain why they waited. The clerk set the papers down and held out a pen. Delia slid her own across the table first. It had come out of a shirt pocket 12 years earlier, at a card table by a window. He took it. Then he did the thing that made the clerk wait. Sir, it's 6 pages. They're the same 6 pages every time. I'll be a minute. He read them. All of them, front to back. Nobody hurried him. The rule was the rule, and he was the one who had made it. Then the judge asked the question, Mr. Petrak, is this your daughter? Yes. It was the shortest answer he gave anybody that year. The file on Delia Marsh had closed by itself when she was 18. That is what those files do. This one would not. Now let me ask you something. What would you have done sitting in that second row? Hearing somebody else explain a kindness you were never able to explain yourself. Tell me down in the comments. I read every one. Rest easy now. There will be another one waiting the next time you come this way.